Next up, to kick off the afternoon, is a conversation appropriately during not quite an election year, but almost, a conversation about how the elections will play out for digital media. So help me welcome David Hirschman, Elizabeth Wilner, Carol Davidson, and J.C. Medici. I hope I got that right. Did I get it right?
I think the mics are on. Well, thanks everybody for coming. It's wonderful to have you here at Street Fight Summit, and I'm really psyched to be with these great panelists today who represent a bunch of different ways into thinking about how political spending is going to affect local in 2016 and also 2015. So if you could just go around and kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about kind of where you're coming from.
So I'm J.C. Medici. Is this on? Yeah. J.C. Medici. I run Rocket Fuel's political and advocacy team. Essentially, Rocket Fuel is a programmatic company that leverages proprietary artificial intelligence to deliver meaningful campaigns online. How that would relate to politics is we use something called moment scoring. So any company can go out and leverage, say, a voter file. What Rocket Fuel is makes a distinction when you're using that voter file. It's like, when do you want to engage someone on what device to achieve a specific goal. So I run our DC office and have been with the firm almost 3 years.
Hi, I'm Carol Davidson. I have been working in large-scale data integration and cable set-top box creation for a long time. In 2012, I went to the Barack Obama campaign and led their TV targeting efforts in order to do super hyper local targeted ad buying. And now work at a company called Rentrak, leading their political group. Rentrak measures TV and video viewership across all devices.
I'm Elizabeth Wilner. I run the Campaign Media Analysis Group, which is the corner of Kantar Media that tracks political advertising on television. And every cycle we provide our TV occurrence and spend and messaging data to clients on both sides of the aisle, presidential campaigns, super PACs, parties, candidates, and the like.
Cool. Well, I just wanted to start by just throwing out a few statistics about the coming election year forecasts from Burrell Associates. First of all, political advertising is forecast to hit $11.4 billion in 2016, which is about 20% more than 2012. And if you add in what's being spent this year on next year's election cycle, they have it coming out to $16.5 billion. And of that, television, and particularly local television, is forecast to still be the dominant medium, with digital media only taking up about 9.5%. And then also nearly half of all of the 2016 political dollars will be spent on local, meaning state and below, campaigns. So Carol, one thing I wanted to ask you was, there was a lot of talk in 2012 about how Obama was the only candidate doing a lot of stuff with large-scale local TV viewership data, and you all got a distinct advantage from kind of buying on networks that aren't traditionally thought of as local, where to find local audiences. Could you talk a little bit about how that worked, and is that still an advantage in 2016?
Yeah, so people have always looked at some data to make a decision, but in 2012, Barack Obama was the only campaign to take the voter file information of who are the actual, if you're registered to vote, you're on a list that your Secretary of State provides to the candidates with your home address. And so the Barack Obama campaign took this information, found the 11 million households that we cared about the most for the election, and matched that to TV viewership data. So while everyone was looking at information, we were looking at TV viewership for low turnout Democrats, TV viewership for persuadable voters. And so while other people were looking at standard demographics, age, and gender, right, not all women are going to vote for Hillary Clinton. So age and gender are alone not enough attributes to decide whether or not someone's a low turnout Democrat or persuadable to a candidate. So Barack Obama was the first one to do this. Now, yes, like the first customers of Rentrak after the campaign were the stations and local cable companies that sell the inventory, because they wanted to know why people weren't buying stuff that they bought in the past, and how to get their inventory bought and how to price it appropriately. And then immediately, whereas in 2012, the Barack Obama campaign was Rentrak's only customer, in 2014, we had 100 different campaigns on both sides of the aisle. And so everyone in the presidential race, I kind of compare it to after Kennedy won the election in 1960, everyone attributed that to the debates. And at that point, no one after that debated whether or not powder should be applied before you went on TV. I kind of think of it that way with like data and looking at local data from local sources in political planning and ad buying. And just like no one's really debating whether or not that should be done anymore.
So is there a new thing that I'm sure all of the campaigns have new tricks that they're coming up with, but are a lot of those in digital, or are they in kind of other kinds of data?
No, there's still a lot of ways to take TV data, but I think it's two things. One, it's realizing that TV won the internet, right? Like the internet is attention to internet is going up, but that's not because people are reading more. It's because they're watching more video content on the internet, and so one, just in the TV space alone, there's still everyone's using the number average frequency when they're buying. Right? But we know, if anyone looks at data, that average is a really dangerous number to plan off of. And so really you need to look at histogram information of frequency. And so in the TV advances for 2016, Rentrak is releasing information so that you can then actually do frequency planning. So in 2012, 6% of people in Ohio that were watching TV commercials saw over 60 OFA ads a week. OFA ads. Like there were still Mitt Romney ads, there were still DNC ads, there were still Super PAC ads. There was no reasoning for that approach, and that's only because there wasn't good enough data to avoid that information. And then the next step is, if you've heard ComScore and Rentrak are merging, and this allows you to then actually take this frequency number and understand how digital is extending your reach, not just two separate buckets of information, but what is true. All cross-media platform measurement is really just trying to explain frequency.
JC, could you?
Well, I was just going to say, I think what makes politics so interesting is that there's a universal voter file, registered, non-registered voter, people who are persuadable, but there's two sides combating. And so the more that I can have a centralized 360 viewpoint of a voter, the more understanding that I can have both with offline and online data, the more meaningful the engagement can be. So I don't know if we pioneer. I think some of the things that we talk about are exciting, but I think people can relate to it really well, because we're the only campaigns that Wolf Blitzer talks about on a weekly basis. I mean, Wolf's talking about how much money is going to be spent, and so it gets people excited, it gets everybody engaged, it gets everybody involved, but being able to have that unifying offline and online data is something key to us running successful campaigns.
And one thing I've been sort of thinking about is we had this same panel 4 years ago at Street Fight Summit, and we were talking about different kinds of hyperlocal targeting. How much has the quality of local data changed in the past 4 years, and is there more granularity to use and more kind of ways to connect kind of omni-channel stuff?
I mean, in our world, and I'm sure you guys work with the same, but there's just so many great data and analytics companies out there that all they're doing is creating audience segments that we partner with. So I think that's come a long way. I think the integration of cross-screen when it comes to online, you're now able to scale a lot of these local campaigns that before maybe we weren't able to scale. It seemed to me in 12, it was more about content and context, and now it's really about the audience and placing the ad in the right environment. So we have access to that as well. So the data's improved, and I think the ability, I work for a programmatic company. I think programmatic has made it easier to have multiple touch points with people on multiple devices. And so when you get that 360, you're delivering a more meaningful campaign. I think that's changed substantially since 4 years ago.
I think coming at it from the other direction, there's probably less return on investment on some data sets. I mean, politics is sort of the great source of growth in advertising. All the dollars are flowing in here, it's going up. Every other advertising category, it's either flat or it's going down. So I think there's probably a push by some vendors to integrate data sets that probably yield very little return on investment. So I think there are probably some great additions to be made and being made, but just coming out from the other direction, there probably are some folks trying to sell data out there, and if you don't know what you're doing or you don't know what you're looking for, you might be buying something that really isn't going to get you anywhere. But Carol knows more about that than I do.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of data, and that's all been growing at the time, but the biggest differences between 2012 and now, and Barack Obama started doing this stuff, right? But with cloud computing, data integration is possible. And so when you're buying data, it's not just buying a data source, it's does this data fit into the data I have? Can I integrate this data in together, right? And so like, Rentrak and CMAG work together because they've got great data about, they watch every single commercial. Every single commercial. And they tag it with a bunch of like interesting metadata about what that commercial is like, right? Well, Rentrak has information about who's watching TV when. Those two data sets play together really nicely. Now all of a sudden you have audience and how much audience saw negative ads, how much audience saw, you can now start analyzing the type of what messaging that they're being exposed to, right? But just like taking any data set and trying to throw it into this doesn't necessarily help you achieve your goals.
Does location data matter less when you can kind of know profiles so deeply, voters?
I mean, this is like kind of to me, part of the problem with like, some like Twitter information, right? Like if it's not geolocated and I don't know who this account is from, like, especially in the political space, local matters a lot. So it matters at the presidential level because it still matters what state you're living in. But then at the, more local elections, it matters even more and more. I mean, it's just, so sending out your targeting, you really need to know that this is associated to someone's where they vote and precinct area, right? So it's crucial, right? But that doesn't mean that you have to buy local ads. So I don't even know what local means anymore. I can buy an ad on Pandora and make sure it hits the people that I want to see it in a local area. I can buy a national cable ad and make sure that the reasoning that I'm buying that national cable ad is because the local audience that I care about is indexing heavily and priced-wise for that national ad. So everything is super important local, but I don't think there's a bucket anymore of buying local versus buying something else. You're weighting everything to the audience that you care about because you're looking at one-to-one data for who those people are.
Yeah. When we were talking on the phone earlier, you'd said that political advertising generally and kind of targeting continues to be far behind brand advertising. Can you talk a little bit about why that is and why people still kind of pour a lot of money into just like local sports and news when they are trying to reach local people?
I think there's a bifurcation. I think a lot of the innovations that you see in brand advertising might have their start in particularly presidential advertising, right? I mean, we're seeing some brands trying to use the same kinds of tactics that were used in 2012. But at the other end of the spectrum, politics, you reboot every 2 years. You start a campaign all over again and you're trying to win. And you have incredibly sophisticated campaigns for president and for Senate, some governor. You also have incredibly local campaigns with 3 or 4 people on staff. And so you're rebooting every couple of years. And there's this very strong pull to just do what worked last time. I mean, the thing in politics is if you win a race, you probably don't learn nearly as many lessons from that as if you lose a race. And so, if whoever does something to win a race, the next time they're going to say, well, last time we did this and this is what works. And so I think you have this tension between, there's a lot of innovation in politics, especially at the upper reaches of campaigns, but this very strong sort of gravitational pull to do what worked and an aversion to taking a risk and trying something new. And that's why, on the one hand, you see the campaigns that have the most amount of money making some investments they can afford to make that others can't, but you also see this aversion to risk-taking and saying, well, we don't want to lose, and if we try something we've never tried before and we lose, then everyone's going to say it's because we did what we hadn't done before and that was a mistake. So you get this push and pull between what do we do that's going to help us win the most.
And so do you look at...
I was just going to say, I cannot agree more. That's so spot on. I think technologies go into DC and they're like, wow, we're going to get part of this election. And there's a real hesitancy because a number of political firms have been burned by technologies going in and presenting what they can do, but they don't understand the political business. political is very, very expensive business to run. There's not $50 million IOs being signed. You are getting this in 10, 15, 20K increments, and you are literally taking an RFP and turning it into a live campaign within 4 hours. That's very, very demanding, especially when you're doing that over a 4-month period of time. So I think the agencies are a little bit apprehensive to trust new technologies coming in. And then to your point, you don't get fired for running an ad on CNN, and there is no Q1 in 2017. So if I can be a little bit adverse to risk, go with what I know, still win the election, then it's a win-win. Whereas if I'm going out there taking all these different crazy chances and my technology partner fails me because they've never been in an election before, that's a risk that a lot of companies are not willing to take.
So what are maybe some of the lessons from the last election of like crazy risks that someone took in something like this that didn't work that you maybe learned from?
Well, all our clients are very, very smart, so I admire some of the firms. Like there's a Republican firm like Harris Media, so they just launched a campaign on Snapchat. I didn't think Snapchat would be this much a part of the political cycle. So there are firms that are pushing the needle, but I don't know if I'd want to articulate ones that didn't go well. I would just say that,
or even that other people were running.
I think the challenge that political firms have is that they're like, wow, they try to translate numbers that are oriented with direct mail, and they take those numbers and think that that is oriented with online. So they'll have a very specialized audience in a congressional district that has 11,000 people. And they'll say, well, we want to send this to you to run an online campaign. And I'm like, I mean, in theory, that makes a lot of sense, but we're only going to be able to run about a $52 campaign. So it's very difficult sometimes for people who don't have the experience of taking offline data, onboarding it online, and understanding match rates and being able to deliver meaningful campaigns. I think that's where the struggle becomes. So it becomes this educational process of taking your offline, bringing it online, and still creating meaningful campaigns.
Have you, having worked with the Obama campaign in 2012, did you study the Mitt Romney campaign subsequently and what they did as well, or? I mean, because they had perhaps don't want to talk about it, but
I think the Mitt Romney campaign studied a lot about. I think I agree with people study more when they lose. I lost my job 2 days after winning the election at Barack Obama, so you're immediately stripped from all the resources to be able to do tons of research. At Rentrak, you can kind of look at information, but again, everything that you look at, from like an outside source, trying to evaluate someone else's success, not counting the election winning, you guys looked at our data and we spent significantly less than the Romney campaign spent on ads. So that's great, but that's a misleading KPI anyway, right? It's like, I'd happily spend more if I knew I was getting the impressions that I wanted. So the fact that I spent less was a nice byproduct of what we did, but it wasn't our only goal. So it's almost impossible for outside sources to truly evaluate because they don't know what your goals were, right? So and your goals are not necessarily the same as your competitor's goals. So I might have achieved my goals, my competitor might have achieved their goals, right? Still someone's gonna win or lose.
I think, as Carol said, sort of everybody kind of packs up and goes away, whether they won or they lost. I know the Republican National Committee put together what they called an after-action report after 2012. And as part of that effort, CMAG went in and we presented to them what we saw of the two sides' advertising efforts. And, again, as Carol was saying, we didn't know exactly what the targets were. There were some pretty glaring differences in terms of amount of money just spent on the same programs, the same things. So there were some glaring differences, but we couldn't get inside the head of the Obama campaign and say, well, this is what they were trying to do. That said, it didn't take a lot to sort of look at a couple of the slides and say, oh, wow, that's a pretty amazing gap.
I think it was clear. When we started looking at data, and this is why you have to be first of all, when you get data, now there's a report that tells you how to run your business. You have to ask your data questions, and then you have to get an answer, and then ask further questions, right? And so it's a completely iterative process. But historical campaign buyers bought the news, right? They were content program targeting because that made sense. It's an election, I buy in the news. That's where the audience is, right? And what we tried to bring, the data team at the Barack Obama campaign tried to bring was, we're targeting audience. We're not targeting content, right? So stop judging your audience, because you're judging your audience when you say that they watch the local news. And so now all of a sudden having a data source, that's why it wasn't particularly risky, because now all of a sudden you had a data source that when you asked it that question, what percentage of our persuadable audience watches the local news? Well, now you've asked it a question, it comes back, 40% don't watch the local news. Well, okay, so now it's a clear case point for you to say we shouldn't just be buying the local news. We should be buying Honey Boo Boo if that's what people are watching, right? When you're afraid to buy something, that's because you're judging your audience. But if that's really your audience, don't be afraid to buy what it is where they really are.
And you did pretty well with Honey Boo Boo as the...
Yeah, we you know, you might make some choices at the end of the day after the algorithms kind of come back and say, I don't actually want to be with that stuff, and that's fine. But to make those decisions before you actually analyze anything is a big mistake, right? Because by removing stuff before you actually apply algorithms to sort and look at stuff, you're just dropping stuff from the table, and you're not discovering these kind of amazing things that you never would have expected, like reruns on TV lands, like. You don't discover that if you drop it off the floor of consideration.
How big a part does social data play in all of this and kind of building these profiles? I mean, do you kind of use all of the APIs from Twitter and Facebook and all that in kind of building profiles of everybody, or?
How big is social?
Yeah, well, how important is it in sort of figuring out like who's a voter and how likely they are to vote and that kind of thing?
It comes back to, and I know I'm a broken record, but it just comes back to this 360 narrative. It's, you know, having those touch points of knowing where they are in every aspect of their lives and having that meaningful engagement. So I think it's huge. I mean, Facebook is coming out with their own exchange, and so, yeah, social media is definitely where it's at. It's interesting they come out with the stat there's going to be $1 billion spent online, but what companies don't understand is, you know, Google's got their cut, Facebook's got their cut, then you've got web design, then you've got fundraising. You know, when you actually narrow it down, and this is how I'm going to try to get my quota lower, by the way, is you know, you have to talk about what's the real piece of the pie that you're actually competing for. I think it's like a $300 million business that is truly open to the market, or $400 million. But they all play an intricate part, and I think socials is bigger than ever than any other election previously.
Well, it also depends on what you're trying to do and what phase of the cycle you're in, and I think this relates to brands also, right? Are you in the phase of the cycle where you're just trying to get brand awareness and make people aware that, like, 6 months from now there's going to be this election, right? Are you just in your fundraising phase? Are you just in your trying to recruit volunteers? Because if you're fundraising and trying to recruit volunteers, like, social is imperative, right? You can't do that without it. When you're at the end, though, or Snapchat, like, you're engaging people. That's like your biggest supporters, you're engaging them on Snapchat. You're not convincing someone who is suspect on whether or not they're going to vote for you on Snapchat, right? So it's like as you get closer and closer to election day, your goals change over time, just like with most things. So there is no one solution. It's good campaigns have cohesive solutions. They're able to look at all the different mediums and say, at this stage of the campaign, I'm going to go heavy on this platform. On this stage of the campaign, I'm going to go heavy on this platform. So even TV, which will be the biggest bucket item overall, is not right now, like digital is, because digital helps with fundraising more than TV.
But here's the funny part about running political campaigns. So the day after the election in 14, people were like, started having calls, we started having meetings, and we want to do a DMP, we want to run our own DSP. And you have all these exciting conversations, and like, yeah, sounds great. And then last 4 months of the campaign, it's always the same thing. Well, you know what, we actually just want to run our TV ads online. And that's what it always comes down to that. We're a TV market, and TV's king, and you run 15 and 30-second pre-rolls. So there's a time where there's that engagement process prior to that, but those last 90 days, we essentially become a TV vehicle for delivering unedited ads online.
Well, what also happens as you approach election day, there's a process called lowest unit rates that applies to TV. So candidates, all of a sudden, when it's 60 days out from election day, they get a really good deals on TV. So they start taking advantage of that at that point. That doesn't apply to digital. So digital costs the same throughout the whole cycle.
And you also see, especially at the more local level, you know, candidates who couldn't afford to go on the air before the lowest unit rate hits. And so there's still a lot of money that just flows right to television in the last 2 months of the campaign. We have this trick question we ask a bunch of people, which is, what's the digital version of the GRP? And you guys know what the answer is. The answer is, there isn't one. you know, and I think digital
Although
strategists.
I hate GRPs
yes,
and TV.
Yes, well, of course, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to. I should start saying targeted impressions, which is really what we all think is the metric of choice, but I think the digital folks are still fighting the fight to have their budget be not just what the dribs and drabs left over from what's left from the TV budget, but to actually have up front, you know, X amount is being carved out for digital and to be able to run digital campaigns all the way through. And inevitably at the end, I mean, all you want to do is win. And, you know, with every day that passes, you're one day closer to that. So people just start, not a freak out, but just, you know, they just start throwing the money they have at television. That's,
Another way to get
break that
fired
cycle.
as a campaign operative is to have money left and not win.
Right.
And can you sort of predict when the freak out is about to happen? I mean, is it on a predictable...
It's a predictable pace. Once you get the pace, it's actually quite predictable.
Cool. Well, so we only have a few minutes left, and so I wanted to take a couple of questions from the audience. We have a mic runner over there.
Don't you want to know who's going to win?
Yeah, well, that was going to be my last question about how, you know, Donald Trump was going to be spending his money.
Unfortunately, not on TV.
Hi, Dorian Ben Coyle, Teaming Media and the Mediathon. You guys keep basically saying, it's TV and we get the scraps. So maybe there isn't this level of sophistication, but I'm wondering if there are places where there is a level of sophistication where the political marketers are reaching into different social media or digital channels to reach different target groups. You know, Snapchat, you're not going to reach people over 30, but you can perhaps reach young voters. Facebook, maybe older, more established. I mean, is there that level of sophisticated understanding and spend where, you know, candidates are targeting it that finely?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely that level of sophistication and spends, and I think what we're saying is there is no segment and distribution channel that's just like, I want to reach people under 30. Snapchat it is. Put all my under 30 budget on Snapchat, right? You're still kind of mixing it up across platforms. And right now, there's still kind of this missing, there's a lot of data coming from all different places, but like the way data works is there's raw data, and then it kind of gets rolled up and processed and goes to a certain place, and then it gets sold at a certain place. And so all these companies are doing this all over the place, right? Rolling up data. And then as a media buyer, you get to a place and you're like, okay, here's the TV data, here's the digital data. I don't really understand extended reach. Like, there are surveys and I have an understands of like, people under 30 use this mechanism this much, and I kind of break up my budgets this way. And what's interesting about stuff like ComScore and Rentrak merging is that's finally a place where now this roll-up of information of ABC viewership combined with ABC.com viewership or CBS.com viewership, how does extended reach go from mechanism to mechanism? Will get better, but it still doesn't solve like the app problem, right? There's still no, until Snapchat wants to be, all of these sources of data don't live together, so you still have to make this mechanism of, I'm gonna use Snapchat, but and I'm gonna use it at this budget rate because I know that this is their kind of audience, but like that audience is also still watching TV, and I don't have like concrete data. I kind of have multiplied statistical data of what is the extended reach from one to the other, right?
And so at Rocket Fuel, we work with more political data companies than any other digital company in the space. And the reason being is, like, just take a look at the Republican side. You can't run a Republican a Republican generic data when you have 15 candidates. So the data is getting really, really specialized as far as what your propensity score is on different issues. And so if you work with, say, a company like a Rocket Fuel or companies that have access to multiple platforms, they can ingest this data and then execute these campaigns to this very specific audience against multiple platforms. But as far as the sophistication of data, it's crazy, crazy granular, and it's really, really cool stuff that some of these data companies that are doing.
It's hard to test for real too, right? Because you have polling data, but it doesn't exactly match. And I was just thinking, you know, election day, there's only one. You can't do a test and see how much you do brand lift and spend and then go the next day. And I mean, once election day is over, it's over. So there's that mismatch as well, because the polling and the propensity score is an inference, but it's not necessarily actually directly tied to the spend in the channel you do.
But you're doing, I mean, they're doing real-time survey-based data. They're building up these audience segments. So right now, we're working on an election in Kentucky. There's a Kentucky governor's race going on right now that ends in November. And we literally just got an audience last week. We've got to reach this specific audience for the next 10 days. So this is all like real time. This isn't like you set it and we're going to run with this for the next 2 years. I mean, that's all these firms do is like, how can we get an edge? How can we, we already know these are persuadable. Who's the people that we can bring over to our side? What issue do we need to do? What device do we need to engage them on? What type of media? There's all this data that's being compiled by these awesome third-party data companies that are working on both sides of the aisle, or I should say on their side of the aisle. And then they're leveraging technologies, like Rocket Fuels and other companies like that to implement the strategy. But to say that it's something that's created, and then we look at it after the election, no, this is a living thing that's continuously going.
I wasn't saying that. I was saying it's hard to, there's no sale, right? It's all surveying. So I'm
You're
just
right.
saying, I'm just
There's not a
thinking,
KPI.
From a marketing perspective, politics
Right.
is unique in that it's a one-day thing and that's it. And
Yeah, but it's not, I mean, it's the same as a movie, right? It's
Well,
like
no,
if opening weekend of the
that's
movie doesn't work out, like it's over, right?
Yeah.
But you can do like real-time surveys. So we do like brand lift optimization campaigns where it's like you have a control and exposed audience and stuff like that. So you can actually measure brand lift without having a specific KPI in place other than candidate recognition, or if they're aware of a, like Keystone Pipeline or something like that. I'm over time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we're just about out of time, but thank you so much for our panelists, and everybody please give them a round.